This is another page out of the additional fullness chapter. So on this page, they've taken the original. Oh, you want to be zoomed in, don't you? The original shape of the pattern, and then they've trimmed a neck yoke off of it and transferred this dart up into the neck area, and then all of the rest of these are the additional fullness that they've slashed and spread so that it becomes this picture, and all of this additional fullness is controlled by this, and this little section right here is called a yoke, Y-O-K-E. It sounds like an egg, but it's spelled differently. So either of these would be good candidates for additional fullness. If you took one of your princess lines, you could add additional. So these are the lines that are actually the fit darts, but this additional fullness coming off of it is extra, beyond what it needs to have. And all of these are possibilities that you can do that are similar. This one is sort of a collar. It has nothing to do with fitting, front and back. This one has additional fullness that's beyond what's required, but the way this one is set up, this fullness is necessary to control the dart on this side, but this is just extra. So choose one of those and play with it. I will put the picture on that I've done, but you can certainly choose to do a different one. I want to talk about additional fullness for a minute on something we've already worked on. So we've already put our darts in a different placement, like the picture, and this is the same amount of darting as in the original, which is the minimal amount of darting required for something to fit the same way. If I want to add extra darting to this, I can do that, which is extra fullness, and it will still fit. It will just have additional decorative fullness. I divided this dart into 2 darts, but this still equals that same 1 dart. So if I line that up there and close this, then these two have the same amount of fullness, and it's just the minimum required to fit the same way. If you take any space out of it, it won't fit. If I make it smaller, the same person can't wear it, but I can make it bigger. So often we'll either add more ease or we'll want something oversized, and we can add to it. We can also add additional decorative fullness. So that would be similar to taking this piece, the way it fits now, and just cutting this to a random location and adding more fullness. And that would still fit, but we would have extra fullness where I've spread that open. It would probably help if I moved this out of the way. So any fullness that I add is going to be additional. I don't know that that would necessarily look pretty, but it would count as additional fullness. So if we were to take this original one that we've already done and add gathers to it, so instead of just having these 2, if I wanted to put gathers in it, that would be additional fullness beyond what's already required for it to fit. So if I come back out and we take this one a step further, instead of just having it fit the way it does, if I want to put extra fullness, in this area and in this area, then I would be adding extra fullness through here. And wherever I slash these lines to is where the extra fullness is going to go. If I put it over here, it will be that way. But in my picture, I just have it drawn coming down like this, and it doesn't really come past here. And on this side, I have that same thing happening. So if I took my ruler and I wanted to add gathers, I could have them going in specific different directions, but so I'm kind of keeping my distances between slashes the same, and then I'm spreading it out a little bit wider at the top. So I'm going to go one more. And because I already have my notches here and my gathers are within that, I can still keep these notches. They'll do their job and my extra will be here. And I think I'm going to go ahead and just use that old dart line instead of that new line that I drew. And then I want something similar over here. So I have to draw my lines. Let's see, I want 3/4 of an inch. I have to draw my lines all the way to the outer edge or the paper won't lay flat. So that's an essential part of the process. So I've drawn new lines so that it looks similar to the picture I have drawn. I think I'm going to put in one more, but I'm going to stay within that notch area. So when I'm doing something like this, I can't just stop my lines. I can't cut all the way out. In this case, I have to cut back in from the seam allowance to the stitching line. So I'm going to come in. And the end of these lines is going to be my pivot point. Instead of my bust point, instead of stopping at the bust point because I'm adding additional fullness, I'm going to cut from here and spread the way I want it to go. So on this top section, I'm going to circle the little spot where I don't want to cut through, and I'm going to cut into that from my seam allowance. Okay, so I'll zoom back out, but that's what those circles mean. So this is now going to be an example of additional fullness. And you can do this on most anything that you've worked on. You can add it on a princess line. We'll be doing it on skirts. So I'm stopping right there at the edge of the pink, and then I'm going to come and turn it the other way and clip back into it and leave it attached, just like I do my bust point. So that's still attached. So I could use white paper and it would represent cutting it out of the fabric, because we're not going to be sewing darts. Well, we could sew darts there. We could sew tucks there. But I'm going to be adding extra. And because I want you to see it, I'm just going to go ahead and use pink. But this would be cut out as part of the piece. It's not, it would just be included. I don't have to add a lot. You can add as much or as little as you want. We're now playing designer, and this has a little bit to do with fit, but the choices we're making have more to do with design right now. So I'm going to just add about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch extra on each of them, because I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. And if I add 3/8 to each of them times 5, well, if I did 1/4 times 5, I would be adding an additional 1.25 inches. And if I was adding 3/8, it would almost be 1.75 inches. So I want to add a similar amount, and maybe on one of them I want to have extra just right up here into the shoulder. It's all a design choice. So I want them to be fairly even, but this one, I want a little bit extra right there. Maybe not a lot, but I'm going to put a little bit of extra in that one because it has further to go. So that's my additional fullness. I'm just going to blend that line along the edge of the seam allowance. My stitching line is going to stay in the same place. And I will have extra gathering to do on this one that originally wasn't gathered, but it is now. And I'm going to darken up those edges so you can see what I'm looking at better. Should I zoom in? So those are the edges of what it is. And I'm just going to line my curve up as similar to what the original is as possible. And blend between them. And here's a little spot where I'm actually going to cut a little bit off because it came outside of that curve area. And then I'm going to keep this where the original line was, right there. So there's my additional fullness. It's going to make it look gathered like that one. And I can do the same thing down here. So where I want my widest point, I'm going to cut away from, and I'm going to cut to the edge. And there are similar things to this in the book, but this isn't exactly like any of the things in the book. But that's why you learn how to make patterns, so that you can do whatever you want to. You're not stuck with the patterns that you can buy. Oh, and see, I didn't cut in from the outer edge, so I still have to cut in to the stitching. Oh, I cut one off. That's what happens when you use the scissors. Such a crazy angle. I'm laying it out first to make sure that this is going to fit on the paper, and it does. So I'm going to glue down my first section. Getting a lot of layers in there. And it is possible to do some of these and have them be physically impossible to sew, but this one is not going to be a problem. There are a couple of the ones in the book that students have wanted to do, and it becomes necessary to put an extra seam in it so that you can sew it. And now you're probably wanting to know which one, so they're out of this same chapter. And you probably saw me shift this a little bit when I was getting it ready. And I've gone off the page. So now this is even bigger. But you will want to sew some of them together. See what you like. And this is just a practice run between two edges of the curve, and you might not be able to see it, so I'll zoom in. So these are the outer edges of the sections, and when I drew this curve I missed them, so instead I'm going to trim off a little bit of this one and come back and just hit all of the points, because when you spread it out sometimes you just have to take an average and go ahead and trim off a little bit on the high end and add a little bit to the low end. Well, that's going to get cut off anyway. There's a couple things that I would like to point out about this that may not go exactly the way we've talked about having them be in the past. So I would need to tidy that up a little bit and trim some more things. But what's happened here is that we've made this bigger, and when this becomes bigger so that it's got more fullness and we trim down to here, all of these little edges overlap each other just a tiny bit because we spread it out, which made this curve more than the original did. So because we slashed and spread, this line is longer. This line is the same length, but it's more curved. So it's going to take up a little bit more space on the fabric. And maybe trim out from behind that. And you'd learn a lot if you cut out the first one out of fabric and sewed it together, and then cut this one out and sewed it together. That would be a good extra credit assignment if you wanted to take one of the ones you've already done and add extra fullness. But my notches still work. This now gathers up over here and those notches match. So I would put a basting stitch across here and gather it shorter. And I'd put a basting stitch across here and gather it shorter, and then this notch will line up with that one and it will just sew together. Extra credit for sewing both versions together and taking a picture and showing the difference. And if you get a chance and you've got a class in the building at school and you want to put it on a little dress form and take pictures, that's even better, but I understand not everybody has the ability to get in there. Additional fullness.